During the early 1400s in the Great Plains, there lived a 7-year-old boy named Kenai. Kenai lived with his father Sitka and his mother Nita. On a clear and sunny day, Kenai and Sitka went out to hunt for buffalo or any other animal they could find. One day, "I'll be a good hunter just like you, Papa," Kenai exclaimed happily. "I'm sure you will, Kenai. Now, watch closely." 6 years later. "I'm going hunting," Kenai said to his mother. He was now 13 years old. Ever since his father died from poor health, Kenai had taken over the responsibilities. He hunted buffalo for his mother, who was pregnant. Nita, who was softening her buffalo hides with bone scrapers, paused for a moment and looked up at Kenai. "Okay, be careful." He nodded at her as he began walking out into the grasslands. Kenai followed the buffalo herd for a while. Waiting for a good time to strike, he drew back his arrow, and as soon as he was about to let it go, a group of strange-looking men holding weapons appeared, and they scared off the herd. The men were on horses, and they wore metal coverings. Kenai gasped and ran home immediately. "Mom, I saw strange men over in the field," Kenai yelled, gasping for air. Nita quickly went to tell the chief, Nanook, about what Kenai saw. Together, they devised a plan to invite the group of men over to see why they came. Nanook waited for the men to come closer to their camp. The others stood by their teepees, holding their young close, afraid of the people to come. The warriors held their bows and arrows ready to shoot if there was trouble. Finally, the men arrived. Their leader, Samuel Washington, dismounted his horse and approached Nanook. "Why are you here?" Nanook asked. "We have come to claim new land for our country, France," Samuel said. "This is sacred land, as you can see. Men like you are not welcome," Nanook replied sternly. "We will leave in peace if we get some new recruits." Nanook turned and looked at everyone before looking back at Samuel. "Right now, we're having some trouble with the British. We're planning a battle to take place. We could use some extra men. If you give up a few men, we will leave in peace." Nanook sighed heavily and nodded. "We'll wait for your men out in the grasslands." Samuel turned and got back up on his horse, and the men trotted off. Nanook called everyone in the village. "Everyone, I'm very sorry to say that I will be selecting a few young men to join the people. I want you all to be strong because we will get through this." He called out about 5 names before calling the last. Nanook cleared his throat. "And Kenai." Kenai quickly went to his mom. "Mom, he picked me. I have to go with those men," he yelled, terrified. Nita looked at him sadly. "Kenai, you have to go with them. Everything will be okay. I'll be fine on my own." Kenai looked down and nodded. He hugged her tightly and began walking off. "Wait!" Nita ran inside their teepee and picked up an amulet. She looked at it for a moment, then ran back out to Kenai. She put it around his neck. "This was your father's. He gave it to me, but now I want to give it to you." Kenai looked down at it. "Thanks, Mom. I love you." "I love you too." Nita hugged Kenai again before he walked away with the other men. Kenai followed the men until they all reached the group of French. Samuel approached them and looked over them. "You look like fine men to join my army. I thank you for your sacrifice." Kenai looked up at him. "I am going to put you all through back-breaking training. There will be no resting until our job is done. Do I make myself clear?" All the men nodded and began to walk off into the direction of the eastern woodlands where the British had settled. The walk was tiring, especially for Kenai and his people, since they weren't on horses. Every evening they trained, and at the crack of dawn everyone would wake up and continue making their way to the British lands. It took about 2 weeks before they arrived to the British camp. Samuel and his men built a border around their camp and prepared to ambush them. They waited for an hour, then made their move. The men charged in and began shooting their guns. Kenai and his men used their bows and arrows to kill the people. British warriors came out and shot at them with guns. Kenai shot down half of them with his arrows, but they soon became outnumbered. The battle ended in a matter of minutes. Bodies were scattered everywhere. Few of the British survived, and Kenai was the only one alive on his side. He looked around and began to run away. "Home. I'm going home. I'm never coming back here. Ever." In a week's travel, Kenai arrived back at his camp. Nanook saw him and ran over, surprised. "Kenai, you survived," he said happily. Everyone came around and hugged him. "How's my mom? Where is she?" Nanook gulped and gestured to Nita's teepee. Kenai ran into it and couldn't believe his eyes. There, Nita lay, her eyes closed and her body covered in dots. In her arms was a baby wrapped in hides. Kenai bent down and held the baby. The baby opened its eyes and looked at him. It smiled at him. Kenai smiled back with tears in his eyes. He said a prayer to Nita and walked outside holding his new sibling. "I'm sorry, Kenai. She got a disease, probably from those men. We tried to do what we could," Nanook said to him while touching the baby's head. "Thank you. You tried your best," Kenai said. "She's a beautiful girl," Nanook said. "What's her name?" Kenai bit his lip and looked up at the sky and thanked the Great Spirit. He looked back down and rubbed his sister's cheek. "Nita."